The house was rotting, but so was he. Nathaniel Smith had inherited the old boarding house from his father, a crumbling wreck filled with people nobody cared about, the elderly, the sick, the forgotten. They came, they paid what little they had, and eventually they disappeared. His disease had started years ago, a nameless affliction that devoured his flesh in patches, first his stomach, then his thighs, and then his back. Doctors had given up on him. They said his body was consuming itself. Nathan didn't argue. He simply found another way. At first, it was a test. An old tenant named Mr. Calloway had died in his sleep. No family, no visitors. Nathan peeled away a strip of his back, tanned it carefully, and stitched it onto his own festering skin. It took. The infection didn't spread. The dead flesh lived. After that, the disappearances began. Nathan perfected the process. He chose the weak ones, the ones already close to death. In his own mind, he was being kind, in a way. No suffering, just a swift end. A slit throat in their sleep. A pillow pressed firm. Once he removed the pieces of skin he wanted, he buried the rest of the body in his overgrown backyard. His body was a patchwork of stolen flesh, stitched neatly, layer upon layer. Some pieces were paler than others, some spotted with age, but they fit. They made him whole. The backyard, once a barren patch of dead grass, had become unnaturally lush. The trees were thick and gnarled, their roots spreading wide and deep. The grass was uncut, sickly green, almost waxy in texture. Flowers he never planted grew wild, blooms with thick red petals, dripping with nectar that smelled faintly of iron. Something happened while he was digging a new grave. His latest tenant, a frail woman who barely made a sound when he smothered her, lay wrapped in a sheet near the hole. The soil was loose, almost too soft. He had dug dozens of these pits before, but tonight it was different. The dirt was wet, not with rain, not with dew, something thick, something dark. Nathan lifted the shovel again, but as he drove it down, the ground moved. He froze. The soil trembled, shivering as if something beneath it was breathing. A low, wet squelch filled the air, and suddenly the earth split apart. Roots burst upward, slick and knotted, but thick and veined, glistening under the moonlight. They wrapped around his ankles, coiling, tightening, and quickly moving up his body. Nathan staggered back, but they were fast, dragging him to his knees. The ground beneath him opened up. It wasn't just dirt anymore. It was flesh. The soil stretched like muscle, thick, red, and pulsing. Beneath it, something stirred. The trees groaned, their branches twisted, and for the first time, he noticed the trees along his back fence. Faces in the bark, their expressions frozen in silent horror, some with wide, hollow eyes and open mouths, as if mid-scream. Others were partially obscured, their features stretching and twisting with the natural grain of the wood. His tenants, the ones he had fed to the earth. Nathan clawed at the dirt, but his fingers sank into the wet, pulpy ground. The roots climbed his body, wrapping around his throat and pulling him under. The earth had accepted his offerings for years, but now it was hungry for something fresh. By morning, the boarding house stood quiet. The trees in the garden stretched higher, and in the silence, the house waited. Hungry. Always hungry. The road was barely visible beneath the thickening snowfall. Lucas Henshaw, Luke to his friends and family, tightened his grip on the wheel, squinting through the windshield as his wipers fought a losing battle against the storm. He had checked the weather before leaving Spokane. Clear roads, light snow expected. Now, with darkness creeping in and the edges of the road disappearing under the accumulating white, he was beginning to regret not waiting until morning. The radio crackled, but the signal was weak. Static replaced the weather report he'd been relying on. His mind was elsewhere anyway. His father, lying in a hospital bed in Missoula, alive but fragile. He needed to be there. As he rounded a bend in the road, something dark loomed ahead. At first, it was just a shadow, an indistinct mass in the middle of the road. He eased off the gas, squinting to see better. His headlights swept over the scene and his stomach clenched. A large, dark shape lay motionless in the snow, its bulk suggesting a bear, but he couldn't be sure. Something else was hunched over it, its form obscured by the falling snow. A low, creeping pressure built in Luke's chest as he strained to make sense of the scene. The headlights illuminated a hunched figure. Its massive frame curled over the motionless shape in the snow. Its skin was dark and leathery, stretched over thick muscle, and its head, elongated and bat-like, bobbed slightly as it tore into its kill. Then, in a swift, unnatural motion, the creature jerked upright. It towered over the carcass, easily 6.5 feet tall. Luke caught the glint of small, beady black eyes staring straight at him. Luke's breath caught in his throat. Instinct took over and he slammed the brakes. The creature, or beast, or whatever it was, shot straight up into the air, disappearing into the snow. The tires lost traction. In the next heartbeat, his truck lurched sideways and began to slide, a deep, grinding crunch as the front tires plowed into the ditch, jolting him forward against the seatbelt. The truck tilted hard, the frame groaning under the shift before coming to a sudden, uneven stop. Luke climbed out of his truck, shivering against the night air. His winter kit should have been in the truck bed, but he'd removed it for cleaning. And then came the call about his father. The wind howled around him, and the cold was already sinking into his bones. He had only the jacket on his back. Shivering, he pulled his flashlight from the truck and climbed up to the road. He swept his light toward the spot where the creature had been. The bear's body was still there, but the creature was gone. Something about that felt worse. The snow was relentless. He had to move or he could find himself in real danger. He trudged forward, his boots crunching in the fresh powder. After what felt like an eternity, he spotted a narrow driveway leading into the trees. His only option was to follow it. The driveway led to a large, dark, 2-story log cabin. No lights, no movement. He knocked. No answer. Desperate, he smashed a side window and climbed in. The place was fully furnished, clearly a vacation home, but there wasn't much in the way of supplies. Some dry goods in the kitchen. Running water, at least. No power. The storm must have knocked it out. But there was a large stone fireplace and enough wood for a night or two. Luke wasted no time getting a fire roaring. Wrapped in a blanket he found upstairs, he sat in front of the crackling flames, his body finally thawing. He had no cell signal, and the landline was dead. He was trapped for now. Maybe in the morning he could come up with a plan. The next morning, the storm had buried everything in white. Luke found himself staring out of a window, surveying the untouched landscape. A few hundred yards away, on a small hill sparsely populated with trees, something caught his eye. One of the trees looked off. It was shorter than the others, its shape unfamiliar. He squinted, rubbing his tired eyes. Minutes passed, his breath fogging the glass as he watched. Then, the tree moved. Luke's stomach dropped. The thing launched into the air, massive wings unfolding as it disappeared beyond his view. Luke stumbled back, his pulse hammering. It was the creature from last night, and it had been watching the cabin. Luke spent the day keeping close to the fire, frequently checking the windows. As night fell, just as he was starting to feel the weight of exhaustion, a loud thump echoed from above. His blood turned to ice. The roof creaked under something heavy, then silence. Luke grabbed the wood axe he had found earlier and his flashlight. Heart pounding, he crept upstairs. He swept the light toward the ceiling. Nothing. A sudden crash. Glass shattered. A heavy thump sounded behind him. He spun around. His stomach churned. The beast had landed inside. The thing was even bigger up close, its leathery skin stretched over rippling muscle. The smell was almost overwhelming. Damp earth and decaying meat. Its claws flexed. Luke barely had time to react before it lunged. He swung the axe, but it was too fast. Pain flared as claws raked his side. He stumbled, lost his grip on the axe. It skittered across the floor, useless now. Luke ran for it. He tore down the stairs, the monster right behind him. Another blow caught his shoulder, sending him sprawling. He crashed onto the floor near the fireplace. Scrambling to his feet, he quickly grabbed a fireplace metal poker and spun around. The beast moved along the edge of the firelight. Its beady eyes locked onto him. It didn't lunge, didn't charge, just prowled in slow, deliberate steps. Luke tightened his grip on the fireplace poker. The pacing stopped. The creature sank into a crouch just beyond the flickering glow, its leathery skin blending into the darkness. It wasn't leaving. It was waiting. Luke's heart sank. It understood. It knew the fire wouldn't last forever. The minutes dragged by, stretching into hours. The beast remained motionless, a hulking shadow just beyond the light. Luke sat rigid by the dwindling flames, every crackle of burning wood an agonizing reminder that time was running out. He clenched his fists, his mind churning over what would happen when the fire finally died. 3 hours crawled by. Luke's last logs burned low. His mind raced until an idea struck him. He grabbed the fireplace poker and speared a burning log, then hurled it at the beast. Flames exploded across a nearby couch. The beast recoiled, hissing. The fire spread. The beast charged. Luke jabbed out with the poker. The beast let out a guttural roar as the metal sank into its chest, but barely slowed it. As Luke dove past the beast, he took another raking to his ribs. Pain flared white-hot, stealing his breath. He landed in front of the burning couch. Panicking, he grabbed the couch with all his strength and pushed it towards the beast. The flaming furniture slid across the wooden floor, forcing the beast backward. It staggered, its back hitting the fireplace. Flames licked at its skin. It let out an unearthly screech that rattled Luke's bones. With a final, desperate move, the beast leapt, crashing through a nearby window, wings unfolding as it vanished into the night. Luke barely had time to register that the beast was gone before he realized that the cabin was going up in flames. He stumbled outside, gasping in the cold air. In the distance, flashing red and blue lights pierced the cold night, cutting through the darkness. First responders had found his truck and were now searching for him, drawn by the towering flames of the burning cabin. As he was loaded into the ambulance, exhausted and barely holding on to consciousness, his eyes flickered toward the tree line. 2 small red eyes floated within the shadows of the trees, watching. Then they were gone. His last thought before slipping into unconsciousness, it's still out there.